Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Total War 3 Kingdoms Beginner's Guide. In the previous episode, we looked at the basic user interface, what all the icons and widgets mean, and what they do. In this episode, we're going to be looking more specifically at each individual character, the kinds of characters you can get, their stats, their equipment, what benefit they bring to your faction, or detriment for that matter. And just everything character-centric really is going to be the focus, or at least the surface level of everything character-centric. And we're also going to start a battle with this guy and go through a short battle tutorial, at least of the first battle, which, to be honest, is usually a tutorial battle anyway. So, first of all, when you first start the game, your screen is likely to look more like this. You can open the character panel by pressing Ctrl and F2, or you can just click that icon there with a little guy on it, and that'll bring up all of the characters that are in your faction. First of all, you can sort them. Now, it's not particularly useful at the minute because we haven't got that many, but you can end up getting a lot of characters in this game. So it's useful to know how to sort them and to know how to find what you're looking for. So this panel here will sort by rank. So if you click that, it will order the characters based on who's the highest level down to who's the lowest level. At the minute, we've only got Cao Cao and Xiahou Dun, who are both level 3. We've then got Cao Ren, who is level 2, Xiahou Yuan, who is level 2, and Lady Bian and Cao Song, who are level 1. Again, not particularly useful at the minute because you can see them all anywhere, but especially mid to late game, you're going to have a lot of these, and it can be very useful to know who the most powerful ones are. The second slot will sort by occupation. Now this is going to be difficult to demonstrate at the minute, but if we order them that way, you will typically get your administrators, your prime ministers, your chancellors, faction leaders, whatever the case may be. If we look at the court for just a moment, you can see that we've got administrator, chancellor, grand commandant, grand excellency, grand director, grand tutor, prime minister, and factionaire, as well as the faction leader and his wife. Or if your faction leader is a female, her husband, I suppose. They are all locked at the minute because we just haven't advanced far enough in the game to unlock these positions. But when you get to an imperial court, for example, if you declare yourself emperor late on in the game, you're going to have a lot of positions, and it's very useful to be able to sort them with that. So it's worth knowing that it's there. The next one is to sort by name, so you can quite simply just sort by alphabetical order. It will separate these two, and we did run through this a little bit in the last episode, but I'll just reiterate it. These here, generals, are the soldiers that are the characters that we have in the field. So that's Cao Cao and Xiahou Dun. And the characters of court are basically sitting around doing nothing. They have some functions that you can give them, which are fairly useful. Things like assignments. You can, if they're willing, you can make them spies. A lot of different things you can do with them, which we will get into either later in this video or in a future video. So we've got sort by rank, sort by occupation, and sort by name. The last one is to sort by satisfaction. Now, if we press that, you'll notice straight away Cao Cao doesn't have one of these little faces beside him. That's because he's the faction leader and therefore doesn't have a satisfaction rank. He's essentially entirely satisfied with himself because he's the faction leader. Things are being done at his whim, essentially, so there's not really... He's got the highest office that there is to have in the faction. There's not really anything for him to be dissatisfied about. But it is his job to make sure, or your job if you're playing as him, to make sure that everybody else remains satisfied. So if we look at Xiahou Dun, we will see that he has positive factors, 68, and negative factors, 12, which gives him an overall satisfaction rating of 56, which is about neutral, which is fine. You'd rather him be happy, like Lady Bian here, but neutral's not too bad. You're not going to get any debuffs from neutral, but you're also not going to get any buffs. So if we look at the breakdown of his positive factors, we can see that he's got plus 25 innate satisfaction. That's a buff that's given to the game, which I believe scales with difficulty, down to 10 on legendary. I could be wrong about that, but innate satisfaction is basically just a random buff that's given to you by the game, which may or may not scale with difficulty. On normal difficulty, it's 25. He's got plus 10 authority from people in power. That's something we'll discuss when we look at Cao Cao's character panel. He's also got plus 10 personal traits. That's something we'll discuss when we look at his character panel. He's got plus 10 recently hired. That's because we've just started the game. He's essentially just been brought into the service of Cao Cao, though that doesn't necessarily run in line with the story, but it's not far off, and you could make the argument really that he joined Cao Cao about this time, I guess. So it's not too egregious. He's got friendships within the army, which we'll cover again when we look at armies. Friendship with faction leader, again that's Cao Cao because they're friends and they get along. He's got friendships with passers-by, which is actually a little bit strange. So I just want to see who on earth he's friends with. So if we go over to his panel here, we can click on the tick. Yeah, that's kind of strange. So they are quite chummy with this guy, Yuan Huan, who we are about to kill. That's not outside of the question for Cao Cao to kill somebody that he is pretty friendly with. I'm thinking of Chen Gong in the story. But it's a little bit odd to see at the start of the game. Nevertheless, to give you a tiny little inkling of why that may be, I don't think it's a bug. Cao Cao was actually a cavalry commander for the Han Dynasty before he went his separate ways, so it makes some sense that he'd have some relationships within the faction. And we will look at the relationships when we get into his character panel as well. Now, he's got +2 friendships within faction as well, and that is probably either Xiao Yuan, who is his brother or cousin, I believe, and also Cao Ren and Cao Song, who he is familiar with as well. There's some speculation that the Xiao Hus may be the cousins of Cao Cao, but I've not been able to find any concrete information on that, so for now we'll just say the friends. On his negative factors, you can see that he's got -12 because he desires a higher court position. Again, that is in the court. He wants to be the Chancellor or the Grand Commandant or an Administrator or something. He wants a good job, basically. Don't we all? And that will, depending on the character's traits, that will rise high enough to actually make them leave the faction and hold a grudge against you if you don't manage it correctly. So it's worth looking at anyone with negative satisfaction. You will also get a debuff as well, which is pretty bad, and we'll see if we can get that to pop up at some point. Not necessarily in this tutorial, but when we talk a little bit more about how to manage satisfaction later on. So, without further ado, we'll open Cao Cao's character panel. So all you do is right-click, as it says there, right-click to open character details, and that will bring us Cao Cao's panel. Now, from the top to the bottom, Cao Cao, first of all, is a legendary commander. This is represented by yellow, and you see it here in his level, which is 3. His name is in a gold colour, which basically means that he is a legendary character. Of course, it does tell you here as well, but if you look at the character panel at the side, you don't have this legendary commander thing here. You just got the colour, and you've got the name in gold. So that will tell you that he is legendary, and that will tell you that he's a commander. For Xiao Dun, for example, he's got green and the gold writing. What that means is, if we open his panel, he's a legendary champion. So the champions are represented by green, and the commanders are represented by yellow. Underneath the legend, actually, just before we move on, if we look at Cao Ren, for example, he is purple and his writing is just black there. If we open his panel, you can see that it's white up here; it's not gold. He is a sentinel. He's purple and he's not gold. Therefore, you know he's a generic sentinel essentially, despite actually being quite a big part in the story. So it is a little bit questionable that they made him generic, but I guess he wasn't that impressive. So let's close him. And open Cao Cao up again. So, if we look at the underneath his name, we got Strategic Mastermind. That's his character subtype. So he's a legendary commander, his name and his character subtype. The subtype for Cao Cao is Strategic Mastermind. Now, for most unique characters, Cao Cao being no exception, they have a unique subtype as well. And it's the subtype that gives them their unique buffs and abilities usually. So if we look at the first line there, it says current XP, 8,250 out of 16,000. Pretty self-explanatory. What that means is, at the minute, he has 8,250 points of experience, and he needs 16,000 total to level up to level 4. Which obviously then that'll change to a level 4, and you'll start again from 0 with a higher cap. Underneath that, it tells you his occupation. So he is a in fact, while we're still on that, if we look underneath the experience, you've got legendary character. Tells you that this character is of legendary repute. Legendary commander excels at inspiring friendly troops, but weaker in melee, best group with retinues of melee cavalry. Underneath that, you've got strategic mastermind, which is his subtype, and this tells you the buffs and abilities that subtype gives him. It gives him plus 40 cunning, plus 15 instinct, plus 25 authority, which is very useful for a faction leader, and we'll get to the skills in just a moment. You also get plus 1 resilience. Resilience is here, and that basically tells you whether or not your general's going to die if they fall in battle. So with unique characters or with legendary characters, they typically get an ability called resilience, and if they're killed in battle, they will instead be wounded. They have a high chance to gain a negative trait like injured or one-eyed or lame or something along those lines, which will debuff a particular stat. It tends to be through random chance, but there are some story-driven events that can cause it as well. So that's all the resilience means, essentially. And he can still die. If he was to fall in battle, I believe it's 3 times in a row for Cao Cao. Or no, maybe twice before level 4. Basically what you'll see is that'll be green. It'll then go yellow if he dies once, and then it'll go red. And if he dies when it's on red, then he dies for good. And the faction at the minute will go into Regency, because our heir, Cao Pi, is not of age yet. We will cover the family tree and faction heirs and everything in more detail, don't worry. So if we go back to the character panel, we've got plus 1 resilience. We've also got plus 50 income from family estates if he's the faction leader. So while Cao Cao is the faction leader, you get plus 50% income from all of your family estates. And we looked at the gold in the last tutorial. Family estates is actually the majority of his income right now. It's 3,000 from family estates, so it's nice to get that extra 50% on that with Cao Cao from the beginning. He also has minus 25 redeployment cost if the character is Prime Minister, heir, or faction leader. Minus 15% recruitment cost for cavalry if he's the heir, Prime Minister, or faction leader. And plus 2 available spy positions, again, if he's the heir, Prime Minister, or faction leader. Now, it's not going to be too applicable to Cao Cao at the minute, but there is a function in this game which would allow, for example, if we weren't playing as Cao Cao, and the faction of Cao Cao was destroyed, but he was not killed, he would then be able to be recruited from the character pool. Something else that we can't... Oh, dear me. Something else that we can't really showcase at the minute because we're on term 1. But you've got a slot here that says candidates, and various characters will come to your court looking for a job, basically, if they don't have one. And when unique characters' factions are wiped out, or faction leaders' factions are wiped out but they don't die, you can actually recruit them. So while it's not applicable to him right now to have that Prime Minister, faction leader, or heir necessary, I mean, it is applicable in the sense that he's a faction leader, but the Prime Minister position or heir position he could still get in another faction after he was recruited, if that makes sense. So it's still worth picking these guys up, basically, if you see them in the character pool, because they tend to have quite strong buffs. You can see underneath that he commends perceptiveness and admires intelligence, and it says underneath that, the wily Cao Cao sees opportunity in the hardships of others, skewing things to his advantage. Very good description of Cao Cao. Now, the ticks at the bottom there we'll get into when we look at traits a bit more in depth, because it's more applicable to traits, really, and they're down here, but we'll get to them. He is a general, that tells you his occupation. We've got his upkeep cost there, which for him is 730. We've then got the factions that he either likes or has a grudge against, because we've got the little angry face there and a flag. You know that this is grudge against, and he has a grudge against Dong Zhuo. There can be no quarter when dealing with this most hated of foes. In battle, as in life, only death will end this feud. And here we've got the past loyalties. So you can see there that he was in the employ of the Han Empire, where he was a cavalry commander. He was also a cavalry commander for Dong Zhuo, I believe, when Dong Zhuo, or shortly after Dong Zhuo kidnapped the emperor. And he then... Well, I won't ruin the story entirely, but obviously he left the service of Dong Zhuo shortly after, and we're now at war with them. The past loyalties can be very useful for trying to root out spies. There is a function in this game where the AI will send spy characters into the candidates pool that we just looked at, and if you pick one up, it could be disastrous for you. So looking at the past loyalties and determining whether somebody has a grudge against the faction that they've left, and whether they were previously employed recently by a faction that you're not friendly with, will give you a decent indication as to whether they're actually going to be a spy. Here we've got his age, 35. We talked about this with the timeless characters. He will age up. He will eventually die of old age because we don't have that checked. If you do put timeless characters on, the age won't be there and he won't die of old age. We've got here that he's part of the Ruin family. Obviously he is because he's the faction leader. And we then move on to the skills, or the stats, I suppose you would call it. There's a very interesting story about the reasons for the colours and the characters the Chinese characters that are on these stats, and we will probably do a lore video about it at some point. But it's really the attention to detail that Creative Assembly have put into that is really, really impressive. For now, all you need to know really is that expertise typically measures melee evasion, and for administrators construction cost. So they tend to make very good administrators. Sentinels rely on this more heavily than anything else. That's Cao Ren, and you can see because he's purple, he relies more heavily on the purple stat. And that tends to hold true with all of them. Cao Cao is yellow, so he relies on authority, and Xiao Yujun is green, he relies on resolve, so on and so forth. For expertise, like I said, typically measures melee evasion. You can think of it in RPG terms like your agility stat, I suppose. It's like your evasion. For your general and the retinue. Although, sorry, no, it doesn't. It doesn't buff the retinue, but it does buff the general. Underneath that, we got resolve. That's basically your health. For an administrator, it also measures the population growth and the administered commandery. Cunning, which Cao Cao actually has a tremendous amount of for a commander, which goes back to this. He's got plus 40 cunning there. And it makes sense. He's a very smart guy, very shrewd. This is one of the most important stats in terms of how a general affects their soldiers or their retinue. Second only, I would say, to authority. But the cunning stat essentially gives you extra ammunition for every so many points you put into cunning. So you see here, Cao Cao's retinue, or Cao Cao's soldiers, have a plus 38% ammunition for his retinue. Now, a retinue is basically the group of soldiers that are attached to that general that are bound to him. So this group of archers here are going to be getting a buff, and you can see that on their panel there. They've got a green line, which is the buff that they're getting from Cao Cao from his cunning. The next one is Instinct. That's basically your damage. And vanguards like Xiao Yuan would be usually specialising in Instinct and damage. We'll get into obviously the different character types in a moment, but Cao Cao's not very high. This is why commanders are not particularly good in duels or in combat. They're more geared to a support role, though they can be kind of effective. And the weapons tend to do a lot with that as well, because Cao Cao's weapon, the unique sword that he starts with, Trust of God, actually, if we look at the panel here on the side, gives a minus 15 instinct debuff and also a 24 authority buff, and also makes him immune to fear and terror. So you're doing a trade-off really with that sword, and for a commander, because you're not really going to be using them in combat too much, it's a trade-off that me personally I'd be happy to make, and I'd like to hear an argument against making that trade-off for a commander really. It just makes sense. And that brings us to the commander's speciality skill, which is authority. Again, because it's yellow, he's yellow, it just makes sense. This is particularly useful for the faction leader. So plus 10 satisfaction faction-wide if this character is Prime Minister, Heir, or faction leader. So if you have a faction leader, like Cao Cao, with a lot of authority, you're going to get a plus 10 satisfaction for everyone who's working for that faction. That's why we see on Xiao Dun, he's got the buff authority from people in power, which is plus 10. That scales depending on how high their authority stat is. For example, if at the minute we're getting plus 10, if we remove that, his authority will go down quite a bit, and he's a bit unhappy as well. And then we only get a plus 8 satisfaction buff. That's still very high, but it's not as high as it could be when we put the sword back on. And he's got the plus 10 again. It also, the same goes for the morale, plus 8 with the sword on. If we take his authority stat down a little bit, it's only plus 6. So the morale basically governs how brave or how hardy or how tough your troops are. The higher the morale of your particular group of soldiers, the more they will sustain in battle before they run away. In a large part, the battles in this game are won on morale, as they were in history, rather than actual casualties, though there is a yin and yang effect between the two. That'll get us onto the traits. So for Cao Cao, we've got I did say superstitious in the previous video as well, but he's suspicious. Sorry, not superstitious. He's +6 cunning, so another cunning boost, and +2 instinct, as well as +10 undercover network cost for enemy spies. We'll get into that when we talk about spies. He's ambitious. We went through all of these on the starting screen as well, but the traits really are just extra little buffs or debuffs that each character can have. If we look at Xiao Yudun, we can see that he's got Fiery, which gives +2 Resolve, +6 Instinct, +10 Charge Speed. And Reckless, which gives +6 Resolve. It does reduce his Cunning skill by -4, and gives him a -10 chance of evading capture post-battle, so he's more likely than most to get captured. And -5 Public Order in his Commandery, +10 Speed, -1 Mustering Terms for armies in the Administrative Commandery, so that's how long they take to regenerate, essentially. So not a good idea to give this guy archers, and the little pluses and X's that they have underneath tells you what they like and dislike in other people. Now, Cao Cao and Xiao Yudun get on very well, as you can see if we hover over that tick there. That's because they have compatible traits, or compatible likes, or compatible dislikes. It could be, there's no one we can really demonstrate with just yet, but it's typically best to try and have all ticks if you're going to have characters in a similar place or around a similar area. Otherwise, you can get some debuffs to satisfaction. It can work in your favour to some degree, and we'll cover that a bit more when we get an army where where they're not getting along. But for the most part, as a rule of thumb, you do kind of want everyone to just be getting along, and it just looks nicer as well. It looks tidier when you've got all ticks there. So that's more or less all we can say about traits. They are variable. Obviously, you can gain them, you can lose them, depending on things that happen, to you, so on and so forth. Down here, you've got all of the different skills that he can learn as he levels up. So each time you level up, you can choose one skill, and it has to be adjacent to one that you've already got. So, for example, when he gets to level 4, we can either choose mobility or intensity. And that's because we've got this one and this one. We could also choose Imperious Presence because it's adjacent to that. And we can choose Nobility because it's adjacent to Dignity. We could also choose... no, we couldn't. Sorry, yeah. So we couldn't choose this one, for example, because we don't have this or this. So you've got to kind of link them together like a chain. So it's useful to know which direction you're going in while you're leveling your characters up, and it can be a bit of an issue when the AI has had a character before you, and they've got really good skills, but the AI hasn't really maximised their potential. So I think that's pretty much everything we can say about the character panel. Perhaps we could move to military. So this will basically tell you Cao Cao's stats, his morale, his melee charge bonus, melee damage, melee evasion, armour, ranged block chance, hit points or health, melee attack rate, melee damage, armor piercing, melee evasion shield, armor shield, and speed. So really, for a general, you want them to have good armor piercing damage, because if they're fighting other generals, they are probably going to have to go through some pretty good armor as well. As we mentioned before, the unique characters tend to have bound armor, and it tends to be very good as well. Likewise, if you're going against a unit that has a lot of armor or very high armor stat here, I'd say if it's above about 60-65%, you want a unit with a lot of armor piercing damage to go up against them. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to do a lot of damage. The melee damage base is really just for more generic units. For lower armored units, lightly armored units like archers and things like that, you'll be fine using your melee damage base. But typically for generals and for heavily armoured units, you definitely want to look at the armour piercing damage. And you can tell the difference between them two because the armour piercing is in gold and the base damage is in white if you look at the icon. The speed, of course, is something else that is worth knowing about. You can also compare with different generals and see whether you're going to be faster than them or not. And the melee evasion, of course, as well. And more for units, ranged block chance is more useful than it is for generals. Generals don't tend to get hit by arrows in this game. You can swarm them, but the chances are you're going to use more arrows trying to hit them than it was really worth to use in the first place. So it's not the best idea to shoot arrows at a general anyway. Here we've got his current retinue, so that'll tell you the troops that he's got on him at the moment. And his special units, this is the troops that he is able to recruit. So that's faction unique units and units that are unique to him. This can change depending on his level. And down here you've got his abilities. So he has got attrition immunity, meaning that he won't suffer attrition if he's got no military supplies, or if he's in the snow, for example. Although I don't know if they included that on this game. But if he's under siege, for example, he won't suffer attrition from that either. He's disciplined, so he doesn't suffer a morale penalty when another general dies. In his case, he is the general, but for example, if Xiao Dun was to die, he wouldn't suffer a morale penalty. And he's immune to terror, which he's immune to scare and terror effects, which we may be able to see on Xiao Dun actually. It doesn't look like we've got it on him. Possibly on him? No, it doesn't look like we've got that ability unlocked on any of them. But we should be able to find it here. I can't remember what the little icon for it is. Yeah, there we go. Enable scare. It won't let us see what it exactly does, but oh, there we go. Scare reduces nearby enemy morale, does not stack. So it basically it makes it easier to make soldiers rout, essentially. And Cao Cao would be immune to that because he has that immune to terror buff there. The Unyielding Earth ability, which will give 1,900% charge resistance and 100% melee evasion. So if you use that while the enemy shock cavalry is heading towards you, they're going to be pretty much ineffective. And it's going to make your soldiers very difficult to hit as well. We see there that it has a 75 meter effective range. You will be able to see in the battle an actual circle that makes it easier to tell what the game is classing as meters. And 30-second duration, so the ability itself, the effects of it last 30 seconds, and there's a 120-second cooldown on it as well. Here we've got that he is in an army with a friend, which is, again, Xiao Dun. And the various buffs that you get from that, so plus 5 morale, plus 5 range block chance. And here we've got Fallen Friend, which is essentially if Xiao Dun was to die, these are the buffs that he would get. So he would go berserk, he wouldn't be able to control them for a while, he would just run into the enemies and start killing them, or trying to. And he would then get them buffs as well, the 40% melee damage, etc. So in some cases, you do really have to be quite systematic and plan out which general you're going to kill first, because you might have to deal with the other one's rage if you kill a friend or family member of theirs. In relations, we will see that he has a wife, a spouse, Lady Bien, who is a court noble. He's got Cao Ren, who I believe, again, it was either his brother or his cousin. I can't remember which one. But you can see there that they're both dutiful, so they get along quite well. Here we've got that they are Lady Bien is his family, so they get along quite well because of that, as well as past events, which I'm not entirely familiar with, but I'm assuming it's probably their marriage or their wedding or something. Xiao Dun, again, he is honoured to be served by one so loyal and effectual. It's also got some quotes about battle. These do change depending on what you do and how you manage your battles and how you act within the game. He's got some dislikes for Chen Gong, like I said. He is pretty friendly with Chen Gong and Cao Cao in the story, and he does show. It's one of the only times you see him show some genuine empathy when he has to put Chen Gong to death. So I guess you would still say that they are rivals, though, for sure, especially from Chen Gong's perspective. So these are the guys he doesn't like, basically. Dong Zhuo, he certainly doesn't like. Zhurong, I'm not entirely... Oh, yes. No, actually, I'm not entirely sure why he doesn't like Zhurong. Yeah, there is a story there, I'm pretty sure. I just can't remember it. And Yuan Shao, he doesn't like because the Warlords Coalition essentially crumbled, and he never really respected Yuan Shao to begin with. He kind of thought he was a bit of a, what would be the word? He thought he was a bit too pompous, and he thought too highly of himself, and Cao Cao didn't really think he deserved the admiration he was getting. We've got some others as well, Zhu Yu and Cao Song. Various different relationships between the characters. That's fairly self-explanatory. He gets along with the ticks. He doesn't get along with the crosses. Although he does have a tick on Zurong. I'm gonna have to look up what that story was again, because I don't remember it, but I'm sure there is one there. So before we head into battle, we'll make sure that we get Cao Cao kitted out. So we'll get his followers. Now we want to look at which one is going to give him the best possible boost. With this guy, we get plus 15 cunning, plus 10% trade influence for Prime Minister, heir, or faction leader. With this guy, we get plus 2 cunning and plus 5 trade influence, but he does get the assignment surplus markets. With assignments, you can only actually give them to generals when their characters are caught, and Cao Cao is in the field, so it doesn't really make sense to give him that, as well as the trade influence and cunning buff is actually a lot less than it is on the representationist. So we're going to go ahead and give him the representationist, and just before we do that, that's currently showing 38% ammunition. If we equip that, he then gets a gold circle around there, which means he's reached 100 on the cunning skill tree. And we now get plus 47% ammunition and plus 11 military supplies. So it's been very useful to give them that already. And if we look at the archers, they've got a greater buff now on their ammunition as well. For the accessories, we could give them the Stone Pig, but again, Instinct isn't particularly useful for commanders. You're not going to be using them in duels. They're not going to be in very... it would be the word heavy combat, so we're going to leave that blank for now. We are, however, going to take Xiahou Dun, who's our other general, who's a champion. His main skill is Resolve, but he can also use a lot of Instinct as well, because he is quite often the guy that we're going to be sending after other generals to duel them, and into combat as well. So it's worth having a lot of damage on him, although his main thing is Resolve. He's kind of a tank. In RPG terms. For the follower that we'll give him, we've got expertise and resolve, plus 2 resolve, and trader. Now this guy does give a wedge formation, which is only applicable if the unit can actually do the formation and it's in his retinue. If we look here, both cavalry units are in Cao Cao's retinue, and these guys cannot adopt advanced formations. That's basically what this is telling you. They can't do a wedge formation. We don't have any such thing on them. They would be able to do it, but only if we give the herdsman to Cao Cao, or give that cavalry unit to Xiahou Dun. And you can't switch between retinues. You would have to recruit them in Xiahou Dun's retinue to start with. So for the time being, we're going to give him the Architect, which is going to give him a boost to his resolve, which is going to give him more health, and also give him more expertise, which will help with his melee evasion and his health when he does get hit. We will X that, and we will... In fact, let's look at the titles first. So, for Xiahou Dun, we can give him a title because he's not the faction leader. Cao Cao doesn't have that little mechanic there because, obviously, he's the one dishing the titles out. So, if we open this up, we'll just look at one that buffs Instinct, I think, for the time being. They're all fairly explanatory. They do tell you kind of what they do and what to expect. I don't think we've unlocked one at the start of the game that buffs Instinct, so never mind. I guess we'll give him Resolve instead. So if we look at General of the Left, it will get 100 plus 100 character salary. So he is going to be more expensive. His upkeep cost there, that's going to go to 250 in a minute. And plus 10 Resolve, which will give him more health. Plus 10 Satisfaction, which will make him a bit happier. And minus 5 recruitment cost for his army as well. So we'll give him that. You see now he's got 250. And his health's gone up to 60% and 8k population growth as well. So lovely, we'll X him, and now we are ready to initiate the battle. To initiate the battle, you want to select the... So if we're here, we select the army by clicking on them with a left click. This zone around here, that's dark, is the zone in which you can move. It's usually a lot bigger than that, but because if we hover over this army, you see they've got a circle there, the red circle inside our green circle. If we're inside their zone of influence, which is that circle, or they're inside ours, we can't move without initiating a battle with them. We can still retreat from the battle, but we can't move without initiating it. So if we select our army and right-click Yuan Huan, we'll get the battle starting, and with this being turn 1, we can't withdraw. There are some instances outside of that where you wouldn't be able to withdraw, but usually this will be an option for you. So if you find yourself stuck in somebody else's zone of influence and you don't want to fight them but you can't move without fighting them, you can quickly attack them and then withdraw, and then you can keep moving. We will be able to showcase that at some point. So we're going to go to the... Oh, just before we start there, we've got here Cao Cao versus Han Empire. We are the attacking force, they're the defending force, obviously. Fight Night Battle, we don't have the ability to do it at the minute. We will cover it in a bit more detail when we do. We've got 782 troops, they've got 266. This balance here is heavily in our favour. We've got the green bar going right to our end. That means that we are expected to win this, and if we delegate, we will win this. If this was red on their side, it will essentially tell you how hard the battle's going to be to win, or whether you have a chance at all. It's not always accurate, but it's usually a good indicator. It'll tell you there that with our superior forces, our advisors predicted decisive victory. So that's what you'd be aiming for essentially in this, because the AI tends to overestimate itself. So if that's telling you you're getting a decisive victory, you probably will. We've got no reinforcements, neither have they, and our casualties predicted are low, theirs is high. The delegate option essentially allow the generals of this army to handle the enemy. It's basically an auto-resolve function, so we could just delegate and get a decisive victory. Of course, then you have no control over the amount of men that you lose, the state of your general's health afterwards, etc. So we're going to start battle. Right, so we're now on the battle deployment screen. You can see here we've got Cao Cao on his horse. He's got a unique character model because he's a unique character, and he doesn't look quite as cool as he does in the artwork and a campaign map, but that's your in-game Cao Cao. We've got here archer units. We've got Xiao Yudun over here as well. Again, unique character model. He looks pretty cool. Now, in battle, and you can again zoom in or out with using the mouse wheel. You can see here we've got these green lines and red lines. Now, what that means is this green, I suppose you would call it a rounded rectangle. We can deploy our troops anywhere within this zone. So we could take this cavalry, for example, and we could stick them there. We could stick them there. Anywhere you like. With the, by the way, we select them with the left click, and we place them with the right click. And you can also drag with the right click if you want to change the formation that that particular unit is in. For now, we'll leave them there. The same goes for them with the red rounded rectangle. That's their deployment zone. We can actually see them at the minute because they're quite close to us, but in some battlefields, especially when there are adverse weather conditions, rain or fog, snow, things like that, can make it more difficult to see where the enemy are deploying, as well as certain skills that they may have. Because this is the first battle you're going to get into, they don't really have a lot of skills, and they're not really a very good army. But the same rules apply to them. There are, if you have troops with an ability called guerrilla deployment, which we will go into more detail when we have some, you can deploy them outside of this rounded rectangle, but not inside theirs or too close to theirs. There's a separate line that appears when you have that ability, which is a grey line, and that'll tell you where you can deploy in guerrilla deployment. The last point of note on the deployment zone is the black line, which encompasses the entire battlefield. That's basically the edge of the battlefield. When troops withdraw, when they run away, they will go through that. They'll go towards that black line. They'll eventually go through it, and that's how they get off the battlefield. If you can cause casualties to them before they get to there, then they will sustain those casualties on the campaign map and in any subsequent battles that you may have with that army before they've been able to replenish. And again, replenishment is something that we'll cover in more detail when we get to it. The other thing is as well, if you've got any reinforcements, they'll also come in at some point within this this edge of the battlefield black line, and they'll be marked with a green pin on the map, essentially to tell you where they're coming in from. You've got your radar down here as well, which is essentially just an overview of the battle. That's the your count, your troops versus how many they've got left. You've got here that you can go the tactical map if you really want to, or you can press tab, and that will just show you essentially a strategic map of the battlefield. Here you've got your... we'll go into these in a bit more detail when we're in the battle, but it's fairly self-explanatory. You've got play, pause, slow motion, forward, fast forward, things like that. What we're going to do for the time being is just set our troops up, because this army's not really the best thing to showcase all of the abilities you've got. But for the time being, we've got here the Battle of Chen, Sun Yang, and it tells you a little bit about the place that you're fighting, as well as the amount of units that you've got, the amount of soldiers you've got, and the season that you're in, and gives you a little picture of the battlefield as well. So, these spears, first of all, you notice that they've got this shield wall formation, or spear wall even. Well, it's called shield wall, but it's spear wall really. If we put them in the formation, they will essentially stand here with their spears pointing out and their shields raised, which means if he had any cavalry units, which I don't think he does, and they charged into us, if they were to hit these spears, they would be immediately impaled, and it's just not a good idea to charge into, well, with anyone really, whether it's cavalry or otherwise, but cavalry are particularly susceptible to this. So if the enemy has a lot of shock cavalry and they like to do charges, this is a good formation to try and counter that. We're not going to need it in this battle, to be completely honest with you. So we'll take them out of that formation. Just a note as well, it does also give plus 15 range block chance and plus 10% melee evasion, but you can see all of that on the panel there before you choose it. For this battle, we're only dealing with a tiny amount of archers and a couple of swords, so it's probably best really to have our swords in our front line. The reason I say that is because they tend to be better in hand or close combat to spears. Spears are good for negating charges and they're good against cavalry, but they're not as good as swords, for example, when they're in close and fighting. Probably not going to need to use these very much, to be completely honest with you, but it tends to make sense to have your cavalry on the flanks, because the flanks being the outskirts or the sides or back of your army, because if they have cavalry, chances are they're going to try and get them around the back of your troops and charge them into the back of you while you're fighting their frontline troops, which will incur serious casualties and a great loss of morale and negate the defense of the spears if they're in shield wall. We'll have Cao Cao on that side with that cavalry, although we might as well put him with his unique tiger and leopard cavalry. We'll have Zhao Yudun on that side with that cavalry. The archers you can put into loose formation. It reduces their charge resistance, but it does make it more difficult for arrows to hit them. This is skirmish mode. That means if an enemy unit gets close to them, they will automatically run away. We are going to turn that off. It can be useful. It's got its moments, but I prefer to leave it off for the most part. And this is fire at will. So what that means is this green line here is your archer's range, and if any enemy soldiers enter that range, they will just fire at them. If you turn that off, you'd have to tell them to fire at them before they will. We're going to leave that on for the time being. And we're going to put the archers there behind the swords. The reason we do that is they've got a front line there of swords to protect them. They've got the spears on the flanks, so if any cavalry trying to come around the back to take them out, particularly anti-missile cavalry like these guys, we've got the spears there ready to counter it. And also the cavalry there to counter it as well. What we're going to do next is we're going to select by dragon, and we're going to select all of the units that we've got. We can either press the G key or go over to this toggle group icon here, and if we do that we get a number 1. Just to kind of showcase that a little bit, you can make separate groups, and then if we press the number 1 it'll highlight that group. If we press the number 2 it'll highlight that group with Zhao Yudun. Because we've only got a small force, it doesn't really make sense to have more than one group for the time being, so we will we'll group them all up together, and then we will toggle the locked group. What that means is everywhere you move them, they'll stay in that formation. Doesn't matter where you put them, doesn't matter whether you drag or click or whatever the case may be, they're going to stay in formation. And we want them facing the enemy, preferably. The other thing is as well, if you don't have this ticked and you've put them in formation, it can be really quite annoying, because if you go to put them somewhere after you've spent a long time setting up the formation, they'll effectively just go back to being in kind of block units, and you'll have to do the whole thing again. So it's worth knowing about that. So we're going to get them as close as we can to the edge of the battlefield, because we do want to engage them as quickly as possible, and we're going to start battle. Straight away you see here they've got the effect of having a friend with them in the battle. That's one of the advantages of having these guys getting along, having the ticks, because they get certain buffs from it in battle as well. when you first start, you're probably going to be presented with this character panel. You can press this, which will give you a much more in-depth idea of the stats and everything else. And if you have, say, Xiao Yudun selected, and we hover over this general, we can see there all of his advantages are highlighted in green, and all of his disadvantages are highlighted in red. That'll give you a good idea as to whether you're actually going to win a duel, for example. And we can see here, if we press the duel button, he is out of range, but his strength is negligible to us. So you see this green arrow going down. 2 green arrows down basically means he hasn't got a chance against Xiao Yudun if they were to duel. Again, this isn't always accurate, but usually it is. Here we've got Xiao Yudun's unique ability, which is Hamstring, which is a melee attack, 1.9k splash damage, minus 50% speed, and plus 30-second cooldown of abilities. So it's quite a powerful attack, and it can wipe out multiple soldiers in a single strike. On a general, the damage will just be applied as a single blow, but it will do quite a bit. On Cao Cao, we have his Unyielding Earth, which we talked about in the previous screen, charge resistance and melee evasion, and it also makes them unbreakable, so they're not going to run away. So, what we're going to do is we're just going to get these guys a little bit closer to Yuan Huan.
Quick march!
And this is where it would be quite useful if you're rather impatient to take the fast forward button and press it, and you see now everything's running a little bit more quickly. You can do forward, which is quick but not super quick. I don't tend to use this option, to be honest with you. It's usually best if you're in a hurry, just to get them to get there as quickly as possible. Now we are going to set the archers on these guys. It is important to note though, one of the more important stats here is range. So you see that they've got 180 range. We have as well, because we are the same unit type as them. We are both Archer Militia. Any archers that aren't Archer Militia usually have a range of 200. So if you find yourself in a battle where you've got, say, regular archers or some of the higher level archers or crossbows, you'll find that you can probably shoot them without their archers being able to shoot you if they've only got Archer Militia. Archer Militia is not really a very good unit. None of these units are really, apart from them. They're okay, and the cavalry. Because we're literally on turn 1, so I suppose you wouldn't really expect it to be. Again, that's slow motion. I've never used that. It might be useful to if you're trying to make a video or something, or you just want to watch the action, but I've never personally used it, and I don't really see why you would. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to start a duel. This line here, this black line, will tell you which generals are in his range. So if we move, when these guys shush, yep, if we move a little bit closer, yeah, he is now challenging me to a duel. He's only doing that because this is the first battle, and I think the devs wanted to showcase the duel, and it is a really good and fun function. Usually a character that weak would not challenge you to a duel, and you'd be lucky if you could actually challenge them and get them to accept it. But for the purpose of this, it's a good thing that it's happening. I suppose we can show what a duel looks like with generals. Now, we could attack them while these guys are still dueling and continue the battle. Personally, I do prefer to watch the duels because they're quite entertaining. This one won't be. He's going to crush him in a couple of seconds, I think. But if you've got two strong generals that are evenly matched and you don't know who's going to win, it can be quite an entertaining thing to watch. So we're going to use his ability, and we're going to press K on the keyboard, which will remove the overlay, so we can watch this in a nice cinematic screen. And we'll see how long it takes Xiao Yudun to put this guy down. He's taken longer than I expected, to be completely honest with you. It can't be much longer, surely. I do tend to like to watch duels with the cinematic, and you can press K to bring the panels back and just look at the health. He's actually, this guy's not doing that bad. And if you look, he is yellow as well, so he's a commander, and this is what we were saying in terms of commanders can sometimes be effective in duels. He's against a champion who are very, very effective in duels, second only to, well, they're supposed to be the best in duels. I believe they're second to Sentinels, based on my own experience. But commanders are typically not that effective, so this guy's actually doing really well. And I have to wonder if if he's been buffed a little bit so that they could show off the dueling system a little bit more. Oh, he just nearly flew right out the screen at us. Yeah, so I think we'll... It's surprising that he's lasted this long. I think we're going to use the... I think... No, he's about to kill him. He's about to kill him. Hopefully we get a nice kill move at the end. Sometimes you don't. Oh, there we go. Yep, off with his head. So that's him done. And then we get Xiao Yu done as emerged victorious. You'll see now that these guys are starting to waver. They are actually shooting at Xiao Yu Dun, which I don't really know why. But this is what we're talking about. It's not really that useful to try and shoot at a general because you're probably going to miss, regardless of their ranged block chance. So we're gonna bring him back, and then what we're gonna do is think about how we're gonna approach this. So I think what we're gonna do, because their archers are already wavering, they've suffered morale hit from their general dying. You can see their wavering general recently died, and because we've got far more archers than they have, we're just gonna go ahead and command our archers with the right click on that unit to attack them. You see the archers will come forward now and run through the swords. It's not a good idea really to have archers out there without troops in front of them, because they're quite vulnerable if they get charged by cavalry or if melee troops get a hold of them, or God forbid a general. But they only have 2 swords and a little group of archers, so I don't think we're in too much danger. So there we go, we got them now shooting, and if we look over here we can see the arrows now landing on these guys. They actually didn't do a lot of damage that time around. They're now shooting back. You can see here this little arrow tells us that our archers are under fire. We've lost 1. They're now running away. It's not really worth trying to kill these guys. Another useful function for archers actually is this right here, which you can toggle guard mode and get them basically to stand their ground if they're firing at an enemy that routes, to stop them from losing their position and getting in front of the frontline troops. Now obviously we moved them in front in this case specifically to showcase that, but it's not usually a good idea. The other thing is as well, we don't really want them getting after our swords, so we're going to bring the cavalry around the back. Although we do want to suffer some casualties, so we'll let them get to the swords. You'll see now that they are a little bit more tentative. They're now starting to charge because they've seen the archers, but they will react to the cavalry as we bring them around the back. And to do that, by the way, I am holding the shift key and dragging with the right mouse button to tell the cavalry which route I want them to take. We're going to engage our sword units. We're going to tell them to stand their ground so that the frontline troops don't move out their spot and the line isn't broken. And we're going to get them in combat. So as you can see now, they're now fighting each other. And the reason we brought the cavalry around the back is because we're going to get them to give these guys a charge in the back. So we're going to get double click with our cavalry. That tells them that we want them to run full speed and charge these guys in the back. And we'll see here what effect that has. So there we go. That's now immediately caused them to waver because they've had general dead and they've sustained damage to their flank. They're both now running away. We haven't lost that many swordsmen and they're now routed. We can chase them down with our cavalry if we like. There's no point in this battle because they're going to be removed from the field anyway because it's just the beginning tutorial battle. So we'll just put our cavalry back over there. In actual battles, it can be useful to do that, especially if an enemy has multiple armies, for example, and you don't want to face these guys again when they've got full morale. You can run them down, get rid of the army there and then. The archers, because they're on fire at will, are now trying to take them out as they run away. So, we're going to claim victory. We got a decisive victory. These range from all kinds of defeats to all kinds of victories. Decisive victory is typically what you're going to be looking at if you win decisively. You can get one above that, which is heroic victory, if you do something that's particularly exceptional, but they tend to be more rare, and usually if you win and you win in a convincing manner, you will get decisive. So we'll end battle. Okay, so we're now on the end battle screen, the decisive victory. It tells you the name of the battle again, the attacking forces, etc. Pretty much what we saw at the beginning, only this time we can see that we've lost 25 men and they've lost 171. We can see that we have 757 remaining and they have 95 remaining. We captured 19 of their guys and they captured 0 of ours. So because we captured some of their troops, we can either take military supplies, which will be +8, we can get 3% replenishment, which was by recruiting the 19 guys that we captured essentially, and or we can ransom them by sending these 19 guys back to the Han Empire. For this particular case, we are going to take the money. The replenishment's usually a good option as well, but I want to show you how that works on the map as well. So we'll ransom,
May they remember
and you'll see now
my
that
mercy.
income will go into our treasury.
It could end no other way.
And we've now got mission success. Pursued by Dong Zhuo's men, Cao Cao prepares to fight. We've got taste of victory, and it's letting us know that we've completed that mission. So we'll X out of that. We've now got another mission. You are safe now, Lord Cao Cao, but we cannot rest. The time has come to expand your rule. The nearby farmland is an opportunity waiting to be seized, and a chance to push back against those enthralled to Dong Zhuo. And for that, it wants us to capture the following settlement, Shen, Pengxian, which is right there. So when we do that, we'll get support from the people, which will give us +5 public order and +25 faction support, which will help with military supplies, public order, reserves, things of that nature. So we're going to X that as well. We've got a glorious victory. This victory is just the beginning, a cautious tactical beginning from here. From here, I must continue to consolidate and expand. Future victory will only come through careful strategy. That's Cao Cao saying that essentially. It's kind of his inner monologue, I guess. And we got some bonus experience for Cao Cao. So if we get rid of that and we open up his character panel again, we will now see that Cao Cao has 10,108 experience out of 16,000. So we're closer now to leveling up to level 4 than we were before. So we've gone through the basics of the characters. There is still plenty to discuss there, but we're going to have to do that in another video. We've gone through a basic battle tutorial as well. We've discussed items to some degree, as well as battle strategy and to some degree the court. And in the next episode, we'll go more in depth to all this stuff, and we'll investigate some new things as well that we haven't yet discussed. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Total War 3 Kingdoms Beginner's Guide. If you found the video to be enjoyable or helpful, hit the like button. It lets YouTube know that this video is worth showing to other people too. And if you'd like to see more of this content, please subscribe. To learn more about the incredible characters and story that this game's based upon, check out my lore series. And if you'd like to see me fight desperately for survival against a relentless AI, check out my legendary difficulty Let's Play series. Thanks again, and I hope to see you again next time.